Hi folks, this is All the Fruit, and today I'm presenting you the European yew. Maybe the most dangerous fruit of Europe. Dangerous in many, many deadly ways. This here is one of the biggest trees in Heidelberg. It's growing on my farm, of course not planted by myself. Here it is. Not incredibly big, well, still dwarfing my small tool sheds, but yew is a very slow growing tree. So this one I was told is most probably 80 to 90 years old. The oldest trees in Heidelberg are a bit over 100 years old, maybe 120, 130 years. But the European yew was considered by some to be the oldest tree in Europe. There were claims that single yew trees in Europe were like up to 9,000 years old, basically that they sprouted not long after the Ice Age. None of those claims could be substantiated because all those old yew trees are hollow. So you cannot count the tree rings, and it's also very hard to find biomass, which is actually as old as the tree. But by now, most of those claims have been reduced, so I think the oldest yew trees in Britain and Western France, they claim now to have an age about 2,000 years. Well, that's still from the time of Caesar's conquest of those countries. Why is the yew so dangerous? Well, as I said, there are a lot of different reasons. The first one, it's incredibly toxic. And actually, when Caesar conquered Gaul, there are records of several different Celtic chiefs who preferred to poison themselves with yew instead of surrendering to the Romans. Sometimes it was just the chief, sometimes it was the chief with a lot of his warriors. So the yew was always very important for European culture and mentality. It was a sacred tree for the Celts, not just a sacred tree, but a tree so sacred that they used it for ritual suicide. It was, of course, also used for normal suicide and for killing people and for trying people if they are guilty, like if they survive, they are innocent. And of course, because you did not want them to survive, you made the dose so high that they would die. So an incredibly toxic tree, not just to humans, also to horses, sheep and goats. Actually, a fellow farmer lost his whole herd of sheep this year because somebody fed them yew. Somebody thought they would do the sheep a favor and feed them some nice green branches, and the whole herd died. For some funny reason, it's not toxic to cows. So in what other way is this tree dangerous? Well, probably since the beginning of human settlement in Europe, it has been used for weapons. The wood is, I was really surprised, the wood is considered a soft wood. It's incredibly hard. A couple years ago I had to cut off a few branches from this tree, and they almost busted my chainsaw and had to sharpen it afterwards. The tree is incredibly hard and springy, but still, for some reason, it's considered a soft wood. But since the beginning of human settlements in Europe, it has been used for weapons. Well, of course, for stuff like handles and clubs, but also for spears, and most important of all, bows. The famous English longbow or British longbow is the most famous and maybe even the most deadly in a many thousand years old succession of European bows made from this wood. It seems that because the outer part of the wood is soft and flexible and the inner wood is very hard, it's very good to make two-layered bows. As far as I remember, Ötzi, the oldest European ice mummy, had a bow made of European yew. There are also many examples through antiquity, and of course the most famous ones, the British longbows of the Middle Ages, which dominated many a medieval battlefield, and which also dominated European trade. A much less known fact. Well, around the middle of the Middle Ages, the British depleted their whole European yew forests, so they had to start importing from Europe. And actually they devised a cunning scheme. Every ship that wanted to trade with Britain had to import 3, later even 4, bow stuffs, like yew stuffs suitable for making bows, for every ton of goods it would import. So a big ship which had like 200 or 300 tons of goods, they had to import, in some cases, over 1,000 staffs of yew for bow making, because the British were the only ones who could make those perfect long bows which were as big as a person. Yeah, so it's estimated that over the centuries more than 1 million yew stuffs were imported into Britain. The populations and forests first of like Britain, then like Western France, Spain, Germany, Italy, Bohemia got depleted. I read some interesting accounts that the King of Bavaria wanted a permit to cut down a lot of yew trees to sell to Britain. He asked for a royal monopoly from the Kaiser, from the Emperor, and then a couple decades later the Emperor decided to make this an imperial monopoly to earn a lot of money from yews, and then the King of Bavaria was protesting that the trees were cut in his forests and so on. All this went on till the 17th century, when the British turned towards the Baltics, quite a faraway place which was not really controlled by the British fleet. And yeah, it is said that by the 17th century, not the technical advances in gun technology, but the depletion of the European yew forest made the Europeans switch from longbows to guns and muskets. So it seems that, well, the guns and muskets and cannons had been around for hundreds of years and were basically only used to scare horses and were not that important for military purposes. But from the 17th century on, yeah, they got quite a lot better. And also, since there were no more big yew forests left in Europe, Europe switched from longbows and also crossbows to guns. So, well, after talking so much about this dangerous fruit, let's eat it. Because, except for everything else, this fruit is actually edible. Well, how can the most toxic fruit in Europe be edible? Well, it's like with the famous fugu of Japan or the ackee of West Africa and Jamaica. You have to know how to eat it, when to eat it, and most important, what part not to eat. So, with the European yew, every part of the tree is incredibly toxic, except for this pink aril which surrounds the seed. And since those are not angiosperms but gymnosperms, which have by definition naked seeds, the seed is the seed is peeking out of a hole in the aril. So the pink aril is edible. Birds are supposed to eat it. It's nice and sweet. It's also very slimy. So the taste is basically sweetness. There is maybe a trace of sourness. Maybe I'm imagining this, but there could be a trace of some weak flavor. But basically it's sweet. Sweet and slimy and refreshing at the same time. But when you suck the flesh off the seed, you should never chew on the seed. Okay, let me suck the flesh off the seed. And now I immediately start tasting some astringent taste, which is, yeah, kind of a warning. I immediately recognize this as a warning not to eat the seed. Here is one of the seeds, by the way. So the seeds, like everything else, are incredibly toxic, and often it was specifically the seeds used to poison people or poison yourself. So if you want to die, basically eat you fruit together with the seeds. No, please don't eat you fruit together with the seeds and don't die. Well, the funny thing is, here in Europe, it's being foraged on a very small scale by people. Basically, I never brought it home or made anything from it. I'm just eating it out of hand wherever I see it. But Japanese people have told me that in Japan, you can actually buy it in grocery stores. I think those Japanese are very brave to eat, well, to harvest and sell berries in grocery stores. Nice berry. If you are really confident in yourself, you can try it. Just be careful not to chew or swallow the seed. I don't know if one seed would kill you, but a couple certainly will. So folks, this was a very long video about the European yew, its history and its toxicity. Oh, by the way, the toxin is Taxol as far as I remember. Stay tuned for a lot more fruit videos from the farms and gardens of beautiful Heidelberg. And don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.